me start by saying that I served in a public health capacity. I was on a board of health in Cincinnati, very local. And when we addressed issues, they were very thought-provoking when we saw scourges of health events taking place. But we looked at data. And we looked at data and we looked and took consideration of a patient's rights and their civil rights. And that was a key component to how we addressed issues. And it's how it should be addressed. But the United States response to COVID-19, just failed in so many serious respects. Many policy directives were issued by federal, state, local, just seemed misguided and actively harmful and often just ignored available data and research. And that's a huge component of this conversation in my mind, is did we do the right thing? Did we look and say, do the benefits outweigh the risk? Did we protect people and their rights at the same time? Yeah, there was a lot of fear. When people have fear, that's one of the greatest times that they need their religion, that they lean on their religion, and it helps them physically and mentally. It is a benefit far greater than a risk for so many people. And the confusion over whether you could go to one place or another weighed heavily on people's minds. I can't talk to my rabbi. I can't talk to my priest. I can't go see them. But I can go here and I can go there. This doesn't make sense. It's not scientific. And that's the problem that we have. And, the bedside manner, to me, coming from public health across America, was horrible. I remember in Ohio right away, the health director saying, this is extremely lethal. Hundreds of thousands are going to die. And I said, we need this warning. It is lethal because we know people are dying. But you have no idea of the rate, of the mortality rate, because no one was being tested. No idea. But we started to learn this group is vulnerable. This group does not seem to be. It didn't seem to matter in many, many cases. Mr. Saitlin, I have concern whether it's really ever appropriate or not for the government to infringe on fundamental rights guaranteed under the Constitution. And I'd like to get your opinion on that, if it's ever appropriate. And I think that's an important part of this discussion.
Thank you, Chairman. The U.S. Supreme Court has held that when the government wants to restrict fundamental rights, it must satisfy the highest burden of proof, which is known as strict scrutiny, which means the government has to have a compelling state interest and that the means that it uses are narrowly tailored to achieving that interest. Absent that very stringent showing, the fundamental rights are not to be infringed by government regulation.
So historically, it's the highest burden of proof.
That's right.
that you would refer to. Thank you. Look, there were many directives that seemed unnecessary and arbitrary and weren't applied equally. We've heard you talk about it. We'll hear more about it, I'm sure. Stay-at-home orders kept children, the population that was least susceptible to COVID-19, kept them from attending school. So arbitrarily, what we were saying is that education is not an essential service. Well, you can say things that lockdown saved lives or this and that, and school closures saved lives, but not when it led to an increase in suicides amongst those that experienced the depression and that followed it. We have to look at all of this. This has to be part of the conversation. And you can't just arbitrarily save lives without looking at all the data. Did it save lives, or did it take more lives? Maybe some of those suicides wouldn't have occurred if they were in school, if we weren't locked down so long. I'm opening that up for questions. I'm not sitting here with all the answers. That's what this committee is supposed to do, is to ask the questions and try and give guidance. The right to peacefully assemble seemed to be protected for some, but not for others. Specifically, those that were most against COVID-19 policies. They got restricted. The same holds true for the right to free speech. So Attorney General, I just want to say, look, opinions are opinions. They're not necessarily misinformation or disinformation. They're just opinions. And you said and referenced it. Did the Biden White House attempt to strong-arm big tech companies to censor free speech?
Unequivocally, yes. It's in times of national emergency when we must be most vigilant to protect our fundamental rights, the rights given to us by God and codified and enshrined in the United States Constitution. And contrary to that principle, the Biden administration coerced and colluded with big tech social media to silence American voices in relation to the pandemic.
So let me go down the line with each of you. Do you think it's problematic that the White House pressured big tech companies to censor speech? Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Ms. Morrell?
Yes.
Mr. Saitlin?
I have not litigated that issue, and I'm not prepared to speak on it.
Fair enough. Mr. Schwartzman?
Yeah, I think these are unverified allegations, that litigation is in early stages, and I wouldn't want to draw that conclusion at this point.
Well, I think they're going beyond allegations at this point, Mr. Schwartzman. Look, these acts arguably weaponize the government against a dissenting party. And as Justice Gorsuch stated in Mayorkas, all these instances represent the greatest intrusions in the peacetime history of this country. And I think these acts require a serious review of public health emergency declarations. And while quick unilateral action by an executive is necessary and appropriate in times of crisis, I do get that, I understand it, I support it. But there's no reason why this authority should be without checks and balances. And there's no reason why the executive should be able to implement directives, mandates under the guise of an undefined crisis. This is not what Congress intended when it passed the act to allow these things. And Justice Gorsuch wrote his opinion that maybe after nearly half a century and in light of what we as a nation all experienced, maybe it's time for another look at these powers. Congress must review and modernize the outdated act in order that it prioritize constitutional rights and liberties, and I think that's a responsibility of this subcommittee